When they embarked on the road to independence in 1810, Spain's American colonies were far richer in resources, territory, and population than the infant United States. Over the next few decades, however, the four Spanish viceroyalties, New Spain, New Granada, Peru, and Rio Plata, fragmented into more than a dozen separate nations, most of them crippled by internal strife, by economic stagnation, by foreign debt, and by outside domination. The United States, on the other hand, expanded dramatically in territory and population, fashioned a stable and prosperous democracy, and warded off foreign control. Why such a staggering difference in development? Historians in this country usually attribute it to the legacies of English and Spanish colonialism. The austere Protestant democracy of Anglo-Saxon farmers and merchants, they say, was ideally suited for carving prosperity from a virgin frontier in a way that the Catholic tyrannical societies of Latin America were not. That view, however, ignores the discordant and unequal relationship that emerged between the United States and Latin America from the first days of independence. It masks how a good deal of 19th century U.S. growth flowed directly from the Anglo conquest of Spanish-speaking America. That conquest, how it unfolded, and how it set the basis for the modern Latino presence in the United States, is the subject of this chapter. Our nation's territorial expansion during the 1800s is well documented, but less attention has been given to how that expansion weakened and deformed the young republics to the south, especially those closest to the ever-changing U.S. borders. Annexation of the Spanish-speaking borderlands evolved in three distinct phases: Florida and the Southeast by 1820, Texas, California, and the Southwest by 1855, and finally Central America and the Caribbean during the second half of the century, a phase that culminated with the Spanish-American War of 1898. Those annexations transformed an isolated yeoman's democracy into a major world empire. In the process, Mexico lost half of its territory and 3/4 of its mineral resources. The Caribbean basin was reduced to a permanent target for Yankee exploitation and intervention, and Latin Americans were made into a steady source of cheap labor for the first U.S. multinational corporations. Popular history depicts that 19th century movement as a heroic epic of humble farmers heading west in covered wagons to fight off savage Indians and tame a virgin land. Rarely do those accounts examine the movement's other face, the relentless incursions of Anglo settlers into Latin American territory. Ahead of the settlers came the traders and merchants, men like Charles Stillman, Mifflin Kennedy, and Richard King in Texas, Cornelius Vanderbilt, George Law, and Minor Keith in Central America, William Safford, H.O. Havemeyer, and John Leamy in the Antilles, and John Craig in Venezuela, all of whom amassed huge fortunes in Latin American lands and products. The merchants were joined by adventurers and mercenaries like General John McIntosh, Florida, Davy Crockett, Texas, and William Walker, Nicaragua, who swore allegiance to inexperienced or weak Latin American governments, then forcibly overthrew them in the name of freedom. Most U.S. presidents backed the taking of Latin America's land. Jefferson, Jackson, and Teddy Roosevelt all regarded our country's domination of the region as ordained by nature. The main proponents and beneficiaries of empire building, however, were speculators, plantation owners, bankers, and merchants. They fostered popular support for it by promising cheap land to the waves of European immigrants who kept arriving on our shores, and they bankrolled an endless string of armed rebellions in those Spanish-speaking lands by white settlers. To justify it all, our leaders popularized such pivotal notions as America for the Americans and manifest destiny, the latter term emerging as the 19th century code phrase for racial supremacy. But along with the conquered lands came unwanted peoples. Native Americans, who were pushed farther west, then herded onto reservations, and several million Mexicans, Cubans, Filipinos, and Puerto Ricans, who were placed under U.S. sovereignty.